Thanks very much. We are the family, friends, colleagues, and former students, and so on, of those who have gathered here today to celebrate the life of Dr. Tabarrok. If we're willing to interpret words liberally, as certainly I am, I think many of us fall into all categories. It's customary on these occasions to reflect on how a lost friend has touched our lives. Well, I'm here to tell you that Bez did not touch my life. He zapped. But this is, of course, an austere academic gallant environment, so I shouldn't use words like zap. The suggestions for how to run today's celebration came from many quarters, and I'm certainly not going to thank them all, but you might wonder why we're wearing these garments. That in particular was Jed McLean's suggestion, because Jed said that Bez really enjoyed his academic life, and this was symbolic of that. And when we raised that with Carolyn and her family, she said by all means, and so that's why you'll see some of us dressed this way. For me, this is really a goblin outfit that I wear on Halloween to frighten the kitty winkies that come trick-or-treating. So this gives me a different occasion for that. By the way, on the podium here on the side, we have different things that represent Bez's life. You'll see, of course, his gown from Oxford. You'll see the book that he published with Fred Rimrod on the front, and other things that I think are reasonably obvious. The carpet perhaps deserves some note. One of Bez's hobbies and joys shared with Carolyn was the business of Persian carpets, which they imported and sold. And in fact, I was thinking, if you're one of Toronto's finest, trying to find out who committed a crime in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, which meant who was a professor of mechanical engineering, all you had to do is search the houses in Toronto, and those with Persian carpets would be mechanical engineering professors. We wanted it here because it's a memory of Bez's Iranian heritage, of which he was always respectful, while at the same time respecting and loving his adopted country, Canada. By the way, as you get to the faculty club, you will see a montage of photographs of Bez and Carolyn, their family, and others, and what I would call their eclectic and yet seamless family. And I hope you enjoy browsing through those. By the way, a number of people have said that they would like to say a word or two. I like to be a regimental sergeant major and say, bang, 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 we're running it this way. But the truth is that there are so many people that wish to talk, and they demonstrate such a wide spectrum of the ways that Bez impacted on different people that we'll just run a little bit longer than sometimes these things. But I'm still hoping that we're out in the fresh air by, say, 3:30. At the end, I would ask, the end of this celebration, I would ask that you remain seated while the family can leave. They would like to go to the faculty club. Carolyn was determined, and you never get in the way of Carolyn's determination, that she would form a reception line or be part of a reception line at the faculty club. So I know that she hopes that most of you will be able to come back. One last thing. There's one obvious way to get to the faculty club, and that is by the sidewalk of the Ring Road. There are other more devious ways. I would suggest you take the obvious way, because we hope that if you look skyward, there will be another element of our celebration of Bez's life. With that, I would like to call on David Strong, President of the University. And as David is coming up, I will say the following. David Strong cannot rise to his feet without, of course, representing our university. But I know that David speaks as someone who has lost a great friend in Bez today.
Thank you, David. Carolyn, Alex, Nicholas, Jeremy. I'm here, of course, on behalf of all of our faculty, staff, and our students, and indeed the many friends of the university, and friends of Bez, of course. I offer you our condolences for the loss of your husband, your father, and indeed a great-grandfather, I'm sure. We're very grateful to you, the family, for letting us share this moment with you. Even though I speak for a large group of people, my remarks, I promise, David, will be very brief. Not through lack of many things to say, but as David said, because there are so many people who would like to speak. Let me simply say this. The world needs good citizens. Bez was a good citizen. We will miss him. The world needs wisdom. Bez was a wise man. We will miss him. The world needs good scholars. Bez was a good scholar, and we will miss him. The world needs culture and grace. Bez was a man of great culture and grace. We will miss him. The world needs friends. And Bez was my friend, and I will miss him. The world needs happiness. And Bez was a happy man. And he made others happy. And for that we will miss him. But Bez would want us all to be happy, even on this occasion. So, though we miss him, let us use this occasion to celebrate his life and share the happiness that he gave to us, and let us try to be happy. Thank you, Bez.
Thanks, David. Next, I'd like to call on Alex Tabarrok, the eldest son of Bez and Carol.
Many of you knew my dad as a colleague, a teacher, and a friend. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my father as dad. He was a great dad. When Nicholas, Jeremy, and I were young, he used to tell us bedtime stories, filled with princes and dragons and flying carpets and all kinds of adventure. But the best part of these stories would always occur when the hero faced a puzzle or a problem, how to cross a river, which road to follow, what lamp to rub, and so forth. And the hero would be stumped. And just when all seemed lost, however, the little brown foxy would appear and help the hero to solve the puzzle. Now, the little brown foxy would make regular appearances like this. So my dad would say to us, and then you know what happened? And all the children would scream, the little brown foxy appeared. Yes, my dad would say, and continue with the tale. Now, the flying carpets and so forth drew from the Arabian Nights and other Persian tales that I'm sure my dad had been told as a child. But it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized the Little Brown Foxy was all my dad's creation. He must have spent hours thinking of these stories, the puzzles and their solutions, because these stories were the most inventive, charming, and wonderful stories a child could ever hope to hear. It took me even longer to realize that the Little Brown Foxy, the magical creature who appeared whenever he was needed and who was always ready to offer support and sage advice, well, that was my dad. The Little Brown Foxy was like my dad in another way, because like all foxes, this one was rather clever and not a little bit tricky. I remember one day my mom and my dad took us on a walk into the ravine behind our house in Toronto. And after walking ever so far and becoming ever so hungry, we stopped for a snack. But no one had brought any food. Not to worry, said my dad. I will use some magic to make some treats for us. And lo and behold, he produced a Toblerone bar out of thin air. Well, as you can imagine, this was just amazing to Nicholas and Jeremy and I. And after the day was done, we gathered, as the Tabarroks are wont to do, to debate the issue. Was this real magic, or was it a trick? Well, the debate raged for some time, but then Nicholas said, I think it was a trick. Why? Jeremy and I inquired. Because that's the kind of guy Dad is. Well, Jeremy and I knew wisdom when we heard it. And so we went to bed, content that another puzzle had been solved. Another kind of trick that my dad was famous for was talking about sports. Now, Dad knew virtually nothing about sports. But he traveled a lot, and he liked to talk to the taxi drivers. So we'd often begin a ride by saying, so what do you think about last night's game? Now, he did this in Boston one time, and the taxi driver started screaming, could you believe it? Could you believe it? Unbelievable, my dad was like. You said it, said the cabbie. What a second half, said my dad. Blew them out of the water, responded the cabbie. Well, it went on like this all the way to the airport. And I'm not even sure whether at the end of the ride my dad knew what sports they had been talking about. But the cabbie had a good time, and my dad had another story to tell. Well, Dad didn't know much about sports, but he did always watch the Olympic Games, from whence came one of his favorite expressions of encouragement. Many of you had the pleasure of hearing him shout this, so I hope you'll join me when I say, go for the gold! Go for the gold! Go for the gold! That was my dad. My dad was also amazing at building and fixing things. I remember scooters and go-karts, and a fort which was built on stilts made from railroad ties and sat 7 feet off the ground. Now, my dad was responsible for most of the construction of this fort, but my friend and I were the interior decorators. And I can't tell you how pleased we were to have wall-to-wall carpeting, which meant, of course, that every wall had carpet on it. Another thing my dad built, our backyard in Toronto fell away into a deep ravine. And one day my dad set up the most incredible tire swing. It was on the side of a steep hill, so you could grab onto it in a run and go flying through the air, at least 10 feet off the ground on the far side. All of the kids in the neighborhood just loved this swing. And sometimes there would be half a dozen of them, sometimes all at the same time, swinging on this swing. Now, as a child, it seemed entirely natural to me that my father should be able to build such a thing. But when I look back, I'm amazed. The swing was a marvel of engineering. Its fulcrum point must have been 25 feet off the ground. To reach this point and to tie off the swing with the proper reinforcement, my dad must have climbed up this tree and shimmied 6 or 7 feet out onto this branch. Amazing. My dad loved to apply his engineering skills to building things for his children. there was no better place to practice practical engineering than at Professor Rimrod's farm. Unfortunately, Professor Rimrod can't be here today, but it's appropriate that he holds an honorary degree from UVic. Now, the Rimrod farm was a truly magical place of my childhood. We would go there in the summer when the black flies swarmed, and in the heart of winter when the snow lay 6 feet deep and you had to walk 100 yards to the outhouse. I remember one winter night in particular. Neighbors from the bottom of the hill came to us and asked for help. They had to leave, but they couldn't get their cars to the top of the hill. Well, Professor Rimrod and my dad sprung into action, grabbing ropes and chains and lamps. Mom and Mrs. Rimrod made hot chocolate and coffee, and everyone bundled up and began to move these cars up the hill. The strong pushed and pulled. Others were directed to sit in certain seats and to jump up and down, right? To generate traction. Right? Yet others were taught exactly how to time the gas and the clutch so that the wheels would not spin. It's great engineering. And slowly, slowly, in the cold, crisp night air, these cars made it up the hill. By midnight, the job was done, and we returned to the farm, tired, worn out, but successful. Ah, my dad said, this is the life. My dad died young. But know this, he would have been the very first to tell you that he was a lucky man who had a good life. And he would also have been the first to tell you that at the very center of his life, at its very heart, there lay his love for his wife, my mother, Carolyn. She was a part of everything he did and everything he was. I'm sad that my dad is gone, but I cannot tell you how happy I am that I knew him well. Thank you all for being here to celebrate his life. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alec. One way or another, I know your dad is watching, and he is honored by you. That was just terrific. Bez had eclectic interests and wide-ranging, curious mind, as I think we all know, and cheery. We have other engineers like that. Jed McLean is one, and I asked Jed to say a word.
If you're walking around the university today, I'd encourage you to do a bit of an anthropological study. And it goes like this. Wander into different buildings and look at the office doors of professors. And you will find there a cornucopia of insight into different departments, different academic cultures, different people. If you wander around, you will see that the office door and the little bulletin board right next to it is a prized place for free speech. And you will find, as I'm sure David is aware, David Strong that is, the occasional rant about university administration. You will find in engineering buildings the occasional Dilbert cartoon. You'll find many things. But I would argue that there's only one office door on which you will find a rip-off of a quote from a great classical philosopher named Plato. And the rip-off goes like this. Let no one without knowledge of mechanics enter here. You might not know that it's contested whether or not this banner was on top of Plato's Academy. And of course, it's not contested that it was not mechanics. It was either geometry or mathematics, depending upon whose history you read. So this is curious, isn't it? Here we have Bez Tabarrok, who chooses on his office door, first of all, to borrow freely from a great philosopher, and secondly, to equate his office with the Academy of Plato, right? I mean, I'm an engineer, but I'm not that stupid to miss that one. But you know, I just can't think of a more fitting banner for the office of Dr. Tabarrok. And I wonder if our undergraduates knew what that thing meant, if they would actually go into that room. And I wonder how many of them see that sign and begin shaking. And they should, because when your dad was in his office, it was serious business, as you know. Serious business in the finest way in which that can be meant. To sit down with Dr. Tabarrok was to feel like you were in the presence of a great man, a great intellect, somebody who was very conscious of what he was doing, somebody who loved the history, the tradition, the culture of scientific inquiry, which certainly in his mind went right back to the time of Plato. And I've heard Bez talk many times about different things. I've heard him talk about clocks. I've heard him talk about mathematical proofs from that era and give lectures on those things. In my job interview, Bez hired me at this university, which is, I suppose, one reason I'm here. I remember he had a Galileo thermometer on his desk built on the principle of Archimedes. And I'll swear we spent more of the interview talking about that than about my qualifications for the job. And maybe that's what got me the job, I don't know. Take a walk around mechanical engineering and you will see that Bez has filled our department with symbols of our heritage and culture as engineers and scientists and academics. Look at the names of the labs. You have the Fluid Mechanics Lab, named after, of course, you all know, Bernoulli. And the Solid Mechanics Lab, love. And my favorite, the Instrumentation Lab, named after Lord Kelvin, whom you all know was more or less the inventor of the strain gauge, a device that's close to my heart. I'm an engineer. So you might get the impression that I'm describing, if you didn't know Bez, a person who was sort of this curious old codger who loved history and was amicable and a little bit foreboding towards students. And I assure you, you've got the wrong impression if I've given you that. Bez was an energetic man who lived in history, who participated in it fully. He studied it, he brought it, he made it here and now. And that was Bez. And that was a wonderful part of Bez. As much as he was rooted in the finest scholarly traditions, and as much as he brought that forward, he was instrumental in moving the profession, mechanical engineering, forward, of preserving into the modern age the scholarly tradition. This is what Bez was all about. This morning I happened to be in a business office discussing things of no consequence, except that Bez was there, because being discussed was the latest in computer-aided design and the latest in some finite element modeling packages that were available that had nonlinear elements in them. And you know, that's his research, which has eventually found its way into the marketplace, which is very flattering for an engineer. I don't know if it was Bez's particular contributions, but he's part of that edifice, which is making our world work. You need to know that he was instrumental in moving the world forward. He was instrumental in the CSME and CanCam, in the engineering community across Canada, in moving it forward, dealing with change. He embraced new ideas. Look, this year, Bez took on the directorship of the Institute for Energy Systems, not an area where he has 20, 30 years experience, but instead an area where he saw an opportunity, a need for vision, and was developing that vision. My last discussion with Bez last week was on that subject of the vision for IceVic. What should we do? Right? What should we do? Oh, the vitals are just bursting out of him. I am an example of Bez Tabarrok's willingness to embrace new ideas. I am not a mechanical engineer, and yet I have happily, and I think moderately successfully, held an office as a professor of mechanical engineering for almost 10 years. Bez hired me out of an electrical engineering background because the future, he said, needed both, and therefore he needed at least one in his department that he was building. That was a surprise to me that I ended up there. And let me tell you another little anecdote that I've never told anybody. Around 1992, I was entertaining thoughts of doing some studies about the impact of technology on the forestry sector, and I decided that I would not apply for an NSERC grant. I would apply for a social sciences grant. And I approached your dad and said, "What do you think?" And he was a little speechless, I gotta say, for a moment, to be looking for a sociology grant in engineering. But he swallowed and said, "If you get that grant, we'll have a party." And I realized after that, it was a very hard time for me around then, not because of that grant, that Dr. Tabarrok would support my career. He would support any genuine attempt at scholarship, at inquiry. He didn't care whether it was mechanical engineering or what. He was there to support that. That recognition has had a profound impact on me because I realized that I could do anything. I didn't have to do what Bez or David Strong or anybody, your predecessors, wanted me to do. I had to be true to my own desire to learn, and I had to pursue that, and he was there to support that. That confidence that he's given me, I'm sure he's given to lots and lots of people. And if there's one thing that I thank Bez for, it's that confidence. I'd like to leave you with a bit of a memory. And this is a memory that I have of Bez, although it's entirely made up. A few years ago, I had occasion to be at Oxford for a while, just visiting on holiday. And I was taken and looked around the Bodleian Library. And I was just filled with this sense of your dad. And I could imagine Bez, dressed kind of like this, without the tie perhaps, with the tie, in that place, maybe a few hundred years ago, or maybe a few hundred years from now. Duking it out with great minds, surrounded by great books, part of the edifice that we hold so dearly. And I told him that when I got back, and he smiled and laughed, and he said, "Yeah, well, that'd be great." And that's my image. I fancy he's there now. Bez, I hope the work goes well, and thanks for your help.
Thanks very much, Jed. As some of you know, Bez and I were colleagues at the University of Toronto for some years. In fact, I realize we both started the same day, maybe unfortunate for Toronto, July 1st, 1996. And it's clear that Bez really... Oh yes, that's true. One always needs a wife to help out and for other things. No surprise, there were a number of people who wanted to come out. Jim Wallace is one. Jim, if you would stand up and begin to approach. Jim, I guess I can remember when we were trying to hire, if I can put it that way, Jim, and he was in Michigan, and he was U.S. Navy. He was responsible for keeping those steam turbines whirring aboard aircraft carriers, and I thought, by golly, here's a fellow who will have a number of great anecdotes when he introduces that very marvelous subject called thermodynamics. And he, of course, did come to Toronto, was a colleague of both of us, and is now chair of the Department of Mechanical Engineering, but he, like David Strong and others, I think, maybe speak for the department, but perhaps more speak for himself.
I've known Bez since 1978. He was one of the Tabarroks were among the first people to welcome me when I showed up at Toronto as a new young assistant professor. I particularly appreciated the thoughtfulness they showed to transplanted people like international graduate students and young bachelor professors who were transplanted to Toronto. During major holidays like Christmas, when everybody with family in the area disappeared, Bez would invite those solitary individuals still around the department to share in the family's holiday celebration. The fun and great company made a wonderful difference in my life. I really did appreciate that. I also shared some of the fun of the Rimrod farm and black flies and other such things, and bring very fond memories. I'm also here representing my colleagues and their families. Bez, as David indicated, was part of the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Toronto from 1966 to 1988. So he has many, many friends still there. In fact, we actually consider Bez to be still part of the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Toronto, despite the move to Victoria. He's continued to collaborate with many people in the department and has visited regularly, most recently spending some leave there during the 87-88 academic year. Even without the visits, departmental lore introduced him to all our new young academic staff, and just let me share one anecdote with you. Many of our lecture rooms have very large vertically interchangeable boards. So if you can imagine this whole section here having a twin, which is on a slide that goes up and down, and they're designed for giants to use. And one of our new young academic staff was complaining to the chair at the time a couple of years ago that she had trouble getting the upper section of the board down. And Derek replied to her, well, we had a great way to do this. Former colleague, Bez Tabarrok, had a great way to do this. Basically, he'd leap up into the air and display his academic prowess to the students and grab onto the handle and rely on his weight to bring the board down. And this went fine most of the time, except finally one day it stuck and left Bez suspended by and he was the first to laugh, too. So. Bez was an internationally renowned scholar, prolific writer on scientific and technical and educational matters. He worked tirelessly to advance the interests of the mechanical engineering community in Canada and throughout the world, serving on professional societies, NSER committees, a very long list of things. One contribution I think that's most appreciated is the significant mentoring role he played for many people in our department. That maybe sounds strange by remote control, but it's true. And also, I suspect, to young academics across Canada. He was a highly visible leader and role model as a result of his energetic organization of CAN-CAM and CSNE activities. And so those who were just beginning their academic careers found him to be approachable and helpful, a warm, upbeat individual who provided encouragement and generated enthusiasm. We're here to celebrate a life. Bez made a difference to those lives of those who came in contact with him. This is certainly a legacy to which all of us should aspire. So to Carolyn and the family, I bring love from many, many people in Toronto who celebrate the life of Bez Tabarrok.
Thanks very much, Jim. I'm going to invite Mike Miller to come forward. Mike, as most everyone here knows, is the Dean of Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Victoria. And Mike will communicate a message that was received today from another old friend, indeed a friend of many in this room, and that friend is Sam Scully.
So to begin, I bring remarks from Dr. Sam Scully, former Vice President Academic at UVic. Jennifer and I are greatly saddened by the news of Bez's premature passing. We want to offer to Carolyn and the Tabarrok family our heartfelt condolences in their loss. UVic owes Bez Tabarrok an enormous debt for the leadership, foresight, and tenacity he displayed over many years in the founding and development of mechanical engineering. It was a privilege to get to know Bez and to work with him. While he and I did not always see eye to eye, and he was not an easy man to win over to one's point of view, I always admired his integrity, his candor, and his absolute commitment to the highest standards in everything he did. I shall always value our association. I join his friends and colleagues everywhere in mourning his unexpected and untimely passing. On my own behalf, I second Dr. Scully's remarks. The university, and particularly the Faculty of Engineering, owe Bez an enormous debt for his tremendous contribution to the establishment of mechanical engineering. Bez and I served together as department chairs for close to a decade. I remember him for what I learned during that time, and especially that through all the challenges and all the competitiveness of chairing two departments in the same faculty, we remained close colleagues. This past fall, Bez gave a lecture on clocks in the Leonardo da Vinci series. That presentation showed his humor, his deep understanding and love of mechanical engineering, and his excellence as a lecturer. For those of us who were privileged to be at that lecture, it's a valued memory of Bez Tabarrok, the commensurate academic. To the family, I express the sincere condolences of all members of the Faculty of Engineering, but most of all, we join with you in celebrating all of Bez's accomplishments.
Thanks, Mike. I invite John Ronald to come forward, and I just say something, and that is that in addition, of course, to the family and colleagues and students, Bez for sure had neighbors. John is one of those, and I'm using neighbors in the broadest of senses. Again, and I think in many ways it means the people of Greater Victoria.
We were fortunate to have mutual friends, or friends who were also friends of the Tabarroks in Toronto, and when they came out to Victoria, the mutual friends put us in touch with one another, and we were able to play a small part, my wife Lillian and I, in getting them indoctrinated into the British Columbia wilderness, and that was a great favor that was done for us because this has developed into a wonderful, close, and very meaningful relationship with Bez and with Carolyn. In thinking about what to say here today, Lillian and I did a little talking about some of the impressions that Bez has had on us, and we've come up with three things that seem to characterize, in our experience, what made Bez an exceptional individual. And the first one was that he, in our experience anyway, was always happy. He was always smiling. He was always outgoing. I can appreciate that there may be some of other you that didn't have that experience quite as uniformly as we did. I can imagine that some of his academic colleagues and certainly some of his former students and perhaps even his sons may not share that completely. But I can say without any hesitation that we were never in Bez's presence when he wasn't upbeat and cheerful and smiling and projecting a love of life that I think we all can be very, very envious of. The second thing is that we thought about is that Bez had an opinion on just about everything. Maybe not on professional sports, but on most everything. And he knew what he thought, he knew why he thought it, and he could express very eloquently and persuasively his point of view on almost any worthwhile subject. He would have been a great debater, or maybe he was a great debater. He could encourage you to offer your point of view, but you always knew where Bez was coming from because he made it crystal clear. The third characteristic that both Lillian and I feel says something about Bez was that he was a very good listener. That's an art that is being lost in this world a bit these days, but it certainly wasn't lost with Bez. When he talked with you, he had a conversation with you, he was genuinely interested in what you had to say. He asked good questions. Oh my, how I wish more people did that. And at the end of the conversation, you knew that you'd not only played your part, but you'd had a nice, competent analysis of your points of view back from Bez. So those are three little vignettes that we, just as friends of Bez and Carolyn, have. They're precious ones for us, and I really appreciate the opportunity to say these words here today.
Thanks so much, John. There are a number of courageous people in this room, but there's none so courageous as Carolyn Tabarrok. And I'm going to invite Carolyn because she said she would be willing to be invited to just speak to you for a moment. Carolyn?
We could talk about Bez and his awards and his degrees, but to me, it's the simple pleasures of life and that knit together a marriage. And on a Saturday morning, Bez would say to me, "What can I do for my Carly? Anything I can do for my Carly?" And I would say, "Well, you know, the front bed needs weeding." "Oh," he'd say, "I don't like weeding." So then I would say, "The windows need washing." "Yes, I suppose they do," he would say, looking rather crestfallen. So then I would say, "You know, we do need some brackets from Canadian Tire." "Oh, yes," he said, and off he would go to browse a Canadian Tire, happy that he was doing something for his Carly. And that was my 36 years of marriage with Bez.
Thanks so much, Carol. I'm going to ask Ed Berry to stand for a moment. It turns out that too often universities have much too little universality. Curiously, one of the best opportunities for universality and to get to know interesting people in other disciplines is kind of a codicil of one of the dreariest jobs of being a professor, and that dreary job is to serve on committees. Bez and Ed Berry served together on such a committee. The outcome was twofold. First, a deep friendship between Ed Berry of the English department and Bez Tabarrok of mechanical engineering. Second, the selection of David Strong as president of the university.
Thank you, David. I feel a bit of an interloper today. As he mentioned, I'm an English professor, not an engineer. I certainly haven't known Bez for 36 years. I've just known him a very few years. But we became very close, and I'm very happy to be part of this ceremony. Others have spoken about Bez's wonderful sense of humor, and that to me was one of his many endearing qualities. And I'd like to just share a little vignette that I think celebrates that sense of humor today. One of the great things about his sense of humor to me was that the jokes he loved best were jokes against himself or about himself, and stories about himself that he loved to tell. And one time, I can't remember the occasion, it was a dinner we were having, and I can't really remember who was there, but he confessed at one point in the evening this rather peculiar thing, that he had an aversion to the color blue. And I probed him on this a little bit because I'd never heard of such a thing. And it occurred to me, really odd, especially in a very sophisticated scientist and engineer, it seemed to be more the kind of thing you might associate with an English professor. And I said, "Tell me about this aversion to blue." And he said, well, he really didn't like to wear the color blue. He didn't like it around him much. It made him very anxious. And there was this general feeling of superstition that the color blue had it in for him somehow, and he was going to stay away from it. Well, I filed this away in the back of my mind, and when we were invited to Bez's 60th birthday party, my wife and I decided we'd make a little card for him, simply to have fun with the color blue. Carolyn asked that I read to you today the silly, intolerably silly little poem on the card, but just as a means of celebrating some happy moments with Bez and his wonderful sense of humor. The card, I should say, has on the cover, you can't see it, but it has a botanical feature that does not exist, I'm told. It's a blue dahlia. And the joke, of course, was on the color blue. They don't exist. And the poem was called, it was an attempt to kind of exorcise the color blue from Bez's life. And it was called A Rhapsody in Red. And as I say, it celebrates not only Bez's wonderful sense of humor, but I guess his toleration of terrible poetry. Some men at 60 might feel blue. We know, dear Bez, that won't be you. We prophesy to you instead that all your blues will turn to red. We've seen a red print of your life, and it includes no lines of strife. When you waltz, as you'll do often, the red Danube, your mood will soften. When to Picasso shows you go, his red period will be on show. When your team wins a baseball game, the Toronto Red Jays will be there. When your car you must repair, we know it's red jeans that you'll wear. And when the spanner hits your head, your bruises will be black and red. From this point on, in short, dear Bez, the skies will smile on you in reds. No red collar work will bring you size. Your red chip stocks will rise and rise. From this point on, in truth, dear Bez, your life will be a rhapsody in reds.
Thanks so much, Ed. Nicholas Tabarrok is the second Bez and Carolyn's trilogy.
Notice that I inherited from my father the need to lower the microphone. It's my turn to speak. I wasn't aware of the contents of my brother's, Alex's, beautiful speech, so he inadvertently sort of blew my intro. I had planned to introduce to you the element of trickery that was very much a part of my dad's life, but perhaps I can elaborate on it instead. I remember, as a very young boy, I must have been 10 or 11, maybe 12, playing table tennis with my dad in the basement of our home. And he would keep score, you know. That's 15 to me, 11 to you. And we'd keep playing. And it took me a while to catch on, but after a little while, I realized that every time my dad scored a point, he'd add it to his score. And every time I scored a point, he'd also add it to his score. This is something that continued throughout all the games he played. I remember distinctively playing cards up at the farm that we used to go to. And I would catch my dad, and he would be dealing everyone else's hand from the top of the deck. And when it came to his hand, it would come from the bottom. And I couldn't believe that my dad would go to the effort to shuffle the deck in such a way that all the aces would be in the bottom. But he would. My dad was the most principled and honest man I've ever known. But in these harmless fun games, he really just loved to cheat. And I think his three sons have inherited those properties. Alex is principled, Jeremy is honest, and I'm a cheat. But I think it's important to note that my dad didn't do this to win. He didn't particularly care about who won or who lost. That wasn't his thing. He just enjoyed it. And I also realized years later that he wanted to be caught. He wanted you to catch him cheating. You know, because if he didn't want you to catch him, we wouldn't have. But he liked being accused of these things, so he could come up with these elaborate denials. And he just loved to go on saying, no, that's not it at all. It's the Iranian way of dealing. You know, my dad loved nothing more than to have a room full of people laughing and joking, and yes, even arguing and yelling. That was all part of it. He thrived on the chaos, and he would often be the instigator of that. In short, My dad wanted to make life as fun as possible. He believed in making life fun, and he sure did. He made life fun.
This Tabarrok family is something else, aren't they? Next, I think I'd like to call Sadiq Dost. The Sadiq-Bez friendship began in 1976 when Bez invited Sadiq to join him at the University of Toronto when Sadiq was on sabbatical leave from his university position in Turkey. They've remained friends and collaborators since, and more recently Sadiq has stepped into Bez's shoes as chair of mechanical engineering.
Thank you, David. I'll try to finish my talk, please. I met with Bez, as you said, in 1976. He invited me to come to Canada for a year. And starting from the first day that we met in his office, he was a little bit in shock because I could not speak English. And then he didn't say anything, but he encouraged me. He supported me, and we worked together. We had an excellent working relationship since then. And he was always there to give advice and support. Then after we settled in Calgary in 1980, our friendship continued and became more than just working, but became a good friendship. We traveled together, and we did a lot of things together, sometimes good, sometimes bad. I'll tell you one of them later. And then finally he managed to bring me here in Victoria. And since then we were not only colleagues, but we were good friends. And having lunch every day together, talking to each other every day together. If one of us goes to a conference, something a day or two, then comes and says, hey, you disappeared again, where were you yesterday? And this continued almost last Monday. But I'm not going to say today to you that how good researcher he was and how good teacher he was and so on. I'll tell you about two things. That first of all, we had lots of things together that we liked very much to do. But he liked something that I didn't like. One was shopping. He liked very much shopping. I didn't like it at all. But I didn't say nothing, and we were going around and looking around, window shopping as others shopping. I'll come back to the shopping, but first, other thing that he liked always quiz me with these tricks and jokes or puzzles. He knew that I was not good at it, but he always tested on me, I believe, first. And then even this happened last week. I said, look, I'm old too, I cannot respond anymore, you know? And he said, oh no, it's not that. And it was in 1993 or 94, I don't remember now. We went to Kelowna together for a meeting. We stayed in the hotel and so on. Then we went out for a dinner. As usual, he says, let's go out shopping. I said, look. He says, let's go. And then we were window shopping. It was 7:30, 8. I thought that no stores were open, but one was open, the men's wear. We went in, and then suddenly he was looking at one coat. I looked at two. He liked it very much. He tried, and so on. He says, I'm going to get it. But he realized that I like it too, very much. I said, you should get it too. I said, no, I don't think it's a good idea. Oh, no, you should get it too. We didn't think about too much. We got the same coat together. I'm not going to tell you what our wives told us later, of course, but almost 6 years he wear this coat every day. I did too. And I don't know if some of you wondering what was happening. And I asked him a few times, are you giving up this coat? He says, no, I like it very much. So I did too. I hope, Carol, you will keep that coat. How can I keep myself that coat? I'm not going to wear it maybe from now on, but it will be in the house. I'll keep it. So what I'm saying that I don't still feel too much anything different, but He was a brother, like a brother to me, an older brother to me. We were having lunch together. We discussed many things together. I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss him very much, maybe in the coming weeks, and so I'll realize. Thank you.
Thanks, Sidi. I asked Cameron Beaton to stand up. Cameron and his family came to Victoria at Bez's invitation. Cameron studied under Bez for his doctorate, then stayed at UVic for several years thereafter, contributing to our department, and more recently has joined Ryerson University, which I believe is probably the fastest growing engineering school in Canada. Cameron.
Thank you, David. I spent about 6 years working and doing research with Dr. Tabarrok. I would like to share some words with you today. Dr. Tabarrok was more than an academic supervisor for all of his graduate students. He taught us how to solve real problems in life. I remember the first time I met Dr. Tabarrok was in December '92 in his office, and I asked him about my academic duties. He asked me, where are you living? And how is your family doing? And this type of questions. He wanted to know more details about my life. And he wanted to help me. He actually did help me. I was desperate at the time, I was homesick and so on. And he helped me in that issue. He told me research and the world of academic needs a mind free from all domestic worries. He taught us how to be responsible. He showed us how to find solutions to the problems. He showed us how to be a team player, a good team player. He showed us how to enjoy our academic life. My last word is directed to him. I know you are among us today here. I remember the last day I came to your office to say bye to you. And you told me this is not the end, it is just the beginning. You are right. Your goodness and influence will continue on. And I assure you I will pass it on to others in my turn. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cameron. Cameron was one of the people among several who said they weren't sure they could make it through, but he has, and it's excellent. Next I ask Marianne Scott.
Now, all of you have heard a lot about Bez's academic scholarship, his love of engineering, his friends, his family, and all those things are true. But there is another side to Bez that only emerged during special occasions, and it hails back to his ancestry and his heritage. A couple of years ago, I decided to surprise my husband, who was out of town, by buying a Persian carpet for a slippery staircase. And who else to ask but Bez for help? And he was certainly up for that adventure. With great enthusiasm, he came over and picked me up, and we went to several stores to sample the wares. It was no surprise that we settled on the beautiful products of the Caspian Persian carpet store. We sampled several carpets, and after making a choice, Bez went into action. I scooted away from him and the Persian owner of the store, not wanting to intrude on the important proceedings. But I watched out of the corner of my eye. The two huddled together and were speaking in low voices, in Persian, of course. Negotiations were intense. Every time Bez made a little hand gesture, I knew the price was coming down a few more bucks. And suddenly, in this Tony 4th Street shop on Antique Row in Victorian Victoria, I got a whiff of a Middle Eastern carpet bazaar. Here was my friend with his PhD from Oxford, his boarding schools, his professorship, his chairmanship, all those honors he received over all those years, going back to his origins, bargaining and haggling like his ancestors had done for centuries before him. I might have been in a souk. All that was missing from the scene was a big silver tray with some tiny cups of thick black coffee to close the deal. And a deal it was. I happily went home and installed the runner. And as recently as last week, when he and Carolyn were over to the house for dinner, he looked up at that runner and said, that Persian carpet looks good. And when I saw him, he had these shiny eyes that he had, and a big crinkly smile on his face. And I knew what he was thinking. And I got them a great deal.
Thanks, Marianne. Every family must have a last-born, Jeremy Tabarrok. And I can tell you that the last-born, or the baby of the family, it's a title they carry through life. And as I say, this honor has fallen to Jeremy.
I'm really pleased to be here and hear all the nice stories about my dad. I was very touched to hear Alex's story and how important it is and how similar it is and how Dad touched us all, because what I want to talk about is the little foxy that Dad told us when we were young. When we were little, Dad would tell us these fantastic stories, and I remember lying under my covers, riveted to his voice, talk about faraway places with golden fruit, talking foxes, kings and princes. No matter what tale he told, I was always amazed how each one would have 3 characters, named Alex, Nicholas, and Jeremy. Later on, when we were playing sports and I was playing soccer, Dad would come out to all the games, and he would run up and down the sidelines, almost like he was playing with us. And he would yell encouragements to us, and he'd yell, "Come on, Jersey, score, score!" But one thing, we talk about is academia, but he would often play games, and often silly games, and pranks. He loved those pranks that Nick spoke of. And it's hard to believe when you say all the degrees Dad has, but he played the same pranks when I was 5. It's the same as Christmas time. Just as Christmas, I came home and went to bed and found a holly branch inside my bed. And again, of course, I knew who had done it, and I confronted Dad with it, and with his devilish smile and his twinking eyes, he denied it. And again, I think of his esteemed professor, and he would play games when he would pick us up. And I'd go to open the door of the car, and he'd hit the locks. And he thought this was great fun. So did I. But what makes that so special is no matter what he did, if it was academia or just his family life, it was important to make it playful and to make it fun. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jerry. Bill Cleghorn was one of Bez's doctoral students during his Toronto years. As typical of Bez's students, they never go away. They keep being colleagues and friends, and most recently, Bill has been able to come to Victoria during his sabbatical and make a set of friends here in Victoria. I welcome you back. I'm sorry that it's this occasion, but I know you're very pleased.
know I can speak on behalf of many of Bez's graduate students to know what an honor and privilege it would be to have had Bez as their supervisor. In my own case, I was having some difficulties in my PhD program and I was almost at my wit's end. But then, Bez was not even on my supervisory committee at that time, but I would go and see Bez day after day, hours at a time, uninvited, and yet Bez would spend the time and give me such inspiration to get my work going, and I owe so much to him for that. He was a great supervisor. Now, if I could add on to that, Bez was a great supervisor. However, there was one instance where Bez's advice was a little bit different than normal. We were co-authoring a paper, and Bez was in Victoria, and by that time I was in Toronto. We got the paper in, and I thought everything was fine, and things would be just great. Months passed, and nothing happened. But as I normally do, I let mail pile up, and nothing, and I got way behind in my mail. So one day I'm opening up the mail, and there's this transfer of copyright form that had to be signed. And I thought, oh my goodness, the deadline's passed and we've blown it. So I phoned Bez up and I said, I'm sorry, I've really blown things for us. We can't get the paper in. And Bez was undeterred and he said, well, get the paper in and send in this form. We might still have a chance. And I said, well, Bez, the authors have to sign this form in order for the thing to go through. And Bez said, well, just sign for me. And I said, well, no, it says here in capital letters, it says, all authors must sign. And he said, Bez said, no, just sign my name. And I thought, well, there's many things that Bez has told me to do, but forgery is one of them. So, being loyal to my supervisor, I shut my door, turned off my lights, and started practicing. Tabarrok. And by the way, Bez had said, well, he'd give me quick instructions while on the phone. He said, well, just use a beta for the B, and the Greek symbol sigma, that's the T in Tabarrok, and kind of print out the rest of the name. So I dug out a letter from my files where Bez's signature was on there, and I practiced it. And then came the moment I wrote it out on the form, and I had the one chance to do it. It was something I couldn't print again. And by golly, I held that thing up, and I thought, gee, that's a damn good job. So I phoned Bez up, and he's the only guy who knew up to this point, I guess, but the conspiracy went through. I put the form in, the paper was accepted, and we were never caught. I have so many fond memories of Bez, and I will always cherish and remember them.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite Dr. Ali Sosha to bring a little bit of Bez's culture to us. Thank you.
I had a lot of page to read from, but because of the shortage of time, I think I'll just try to conclude it with my little Persian poem that I was going to conclude my talks with. I think from what you have heard so far, you know that we can always remember Bez by a person who was always helpful and always cheerful. I think that's one thing about Bez that we always remember. Now, in Iran, at elementary school and also later on, we had to memorize poetry. And I'm sure that even though Bez left for England at an early age, he also memorized lots of poems and loved poetry. And this is a poem about just one line from a famous Persian poet, Saadi. And I'm sure Bez also had to memorize this. So I first say it in Farsi, and then I'll try a translation. It says, Saadiya, مرد نکونام نمیرد هرگز مرده آن است که نامش به نکویی نبرد. I'll attempt a translation. I hope I can do some justice to the, to the initial lines. But it says that a person who has earned a good name will never die. Dead is the one whose name will not be remembered with love and goodness. Bez, I think, should rest in peace. Her name will always be remembered with lots of love and lots of goodness. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ali. I think that that was very appropriate. I'm going to do a slight transition now. I'll make some comments to this. I think in some ways, as well as being a celebration of Bez's life, I know that Bez would think that this is another step in passing the torch to the next generation. Two final reflections from today, in a way, are the next generation. We've already, of course, had some from Bez's sons. As an ankle biter, my son, Doug Scott, and his sister, Sue, who were here, shared with the Tabarrok brothers the business of growing up as children of University of Toronto engineering professor kids. It's a little bit, if you like, the academic analog of the military brat. But anyway, I remember these kiddywinkles. For example, a number of things stay with me, but one is surviving the bitter cold of a Santa Claus parade on University Avenue and coming then to our departmental staff room at the University of Toronto and all
the qualities that Bez had. And of course, I can only make an attempt. But because of that, he has influenced me greatly, very greatly, in who I am. I am a person on the fringes of Bez's life. I consider his influence to be very special to me. However, I know that I am only one of many people who are on the periphery who have felt the ripple of his character. We have all carried some portion of that with us. Bez has, in that way, sent his ripples around the world. I'm here, I feel, to represent the thoughts of those people on the periphery of Bez's life that have been forever changed for having met him. And I thank Bez Tabarrok for what he has given us. Bez, you have touched many more lives than you have known. Thank you from us all.
It's told that when Alex was considering the next great step in his life, he went to his dad and asked, "I'm thinking of marrying Monique. What do you think?" And what do you think Bez said? "Go for the gold." That's a true story. This tradition, then, of bringing wisdom and luck into choosing life's partners seems to be continued for one more generation. Monique, I have to say something more difficult now. About 5 years ago, Bez asked me to join him for lunch. He said he had something important to discuss. We went and he said, "David, I've got some bad news." And then he told me that he'd been diagnosed with cancer. But he didn't want anyone at UVic to know. So there are many in the audience probably that still are not aware of that. But the point is that, as is the destiny of people in administrative positions in universities and as department chair, Bez was then having a rash of difficult times in the department, and I think he simply didn't want that problem to queer, in other words, the discussion of the resolution that in fact came out quite well. But the thing that strikes me is that that day he spoke clearly and resolutely with dry eyes until tears began to well. And he said, "I had really wanted to enjoy grandchildren, and it looks like I might not. Well, that regret was relieved. Bez got to meet, hold, and love, and relish Connor. And Connor, although he may not know the significance yet, has been able to look into those sparkly eyes. So here's the gold. Speak to us at last that Bez told Alex that he should go for. And Connor.
Thank you, David. I need to speak for several people here today. So first, I would like to speak on behalf of my father, who is not well and who is unable to be with us today. And David and Marianne were kind enough to put this poem that my father has written on the back of the pamphlets that you all have. But in his honor, he has asked me to read it to you today. Bez Tabarrok, April 20th, 1999. From Iran to Victoria, from the Middle East to Canada's West, it's a long way to travel, as Bez knew best. The physical moves, the paths of the mind, the hours of study, the toil and the grind. It took that and more to create Bez's achievement. Let's dwell on that instead of our bereavement. I recently had tea with him. It sounds so trite. Sun poured into the windows, a herald of life's might. We sat, his smile under his mustache and beard, the ocean calm and waving, nothing to be feared. We both had our problems, but we gave them no honor. Our mutual joy lay in our grandson Connor. How kind this man, what richness of mind, to be with him a delight of a special kind. Calm, looking for meaning, nothing shallow, eyes often gleaming, good at asking questions, his art of getting you to talk, his bemusement hiding a mind of academic walk. Bez, you were some guy. It's your smile that was so prevalent. It says it all. You were clever, joyful, and benevolent. Adrian Van Hook. I also have been asked to speak on behalf of my mother, who is also unable to be here today. She would like me to say that she, of course, held Bez in the highest esteem and respected him tremendously. She would particularly like to thank Bez for being a wonderful father-in-law. My father and Bez were very fond of each other, and it was a very special joy for my mother to see these two grandfathers sharing being completely smitten with their grandson Connor. And she is thankful for sharing a grandchild with Carolyn and Bez. To quote Reginald Hill, existence is like a huge Persian carpet. Looked at from close up, your little square might just seem a mess. But stand back far enough, you'd see for sure it was all one carefully patterned weave. Bez knew all about Persian carpets, and he saw the beautiful patterns that they weave. And then on my own behalf, to test the waters before marriage, some people move in with their boyfriends, but I did something much more informative. I moved in with Karen's. With Alex away at graduate school, Bez and Carolyn took me into their home and made me part of their family. As with so many others before me, Bez became my mentor and a teacher. As I agonized over graduate schools and career choices, he guided me with sound advice and ready assistance. And Carolyn, too, was always there with an encouraging word and a hot cup of tea as I spent my nights poring over GRE test books. When Alex asked me to marry him several years later, I quickly tallied up the pros and cons. Well, he's a little short, he can't dance or carry a tune, but boy, does he have great parents. The choice, therefore, was simple, and Carolyn and Bez became Mom and Dad. It was a privilege and an honor to know Dad. And as each year passed, I came to love him more and more. When I was a student here at UVic, I would often meet up with Dad, and we would walk home together. We would discuss so many things: the future of my career, stories from the office, interesting questions that we had thought of. It was a very special relationship, and I feel that I have been blessed to have two fathers. Of course, the memories of Dad holding Connor and talking to Connor and walking around with Connor on his shoulder to comfort the crying baby, these will be some of the most treasured of my thoughts. Dad lives on in his sons, Alex and Nicholas and Jeremy, and in his grandson Connor, in his students throughout the world, and in all of those whose lives he touched. Knowing Bez has changed each of our lives and has made us all better people. So let us recall him not only in our memories, which are precious, but even more so in our actions. Let us thank him for his generosity by being generous in turn. Let us pay tribute to him by being kind and honest and true as he was. Let us honor him by inquiring and debating and discovering the nature of the universe as he always did. And above all, let us follow in his footsteps by always seeking the best in others and in ourselves. In his words, let us go for the gold, for this is the life. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Kenny. As probably many of you know, Bez and Carolyn once had a message on their answering machine, recorded in Carolyn's cheery voice, which I can't replicate, but went something like this. Bez and Carolyn have gone for a walk, and they walked, and they walked, and they walked. Well, you don't want to know all of that. And so on. I was reminded of that when we were planning this celebration, and I asked Carolyn if she would like to include a representative of a religious denomination. And Carolyn thought not. But I wanted to make sure, and I asked, Bez grew up as Muslim, and we could, I'm sure, ask someone to speak to that, although I think with Ali we have covered that in a very nice way. Carolyn grew more pensive, but then she said, I still don't think so. And then in a more pensive mood she said, during our morning walks, at the turnaround point, when I was doing my exercises, Bez would always kind of say a prayer of thanks for life, oft looking at the ocean, with some version of his common exclamation, this is life. With those thoughts, I'm going to ask that we now have a moment's silence, when each of us will have our own private thoughts and own private faith to think on Bez's This is the Life. For we're all fortunate that at least in some sense, Bez's life was our life. To Carolyn, I know you will be walking and walking and walking with Bez for the rest of your time in this mortal coil. And one way or another, I'm sure Bez will be there with you, as will all of us. Moment of silence, please.
so my influence today. So positive, so caring.
Well, he was a real academic. He would argue forever, which I love. But he listened.
Obviously, someone who would be able to maintain balance, just like time for family, and to hear that. So often, academics sometimes go away to a corner and become very obscure sometimes.
When I
hard times.